A freezing night, a knock on the cabin door. When rancher Adam Hale opened it, Mercy stepped in wearing an Apache blanket. What followed was a storm of temptation, survival, and redemption in the wild frontier. Like, subscribe, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from, partner? Let's get started. The wind screamed like a wounded beast across the Montana plains, rattling the shutters of Adam Hale's small cabin. The rancher had spent weeks alone, with only the fire and his thoughts for company. When the knock came, 3 sharp raps through the roar of the storm, it sounded less like a visitor and more like fate itself. Adam unlatched the door, and the wind nearly ripped it from his hand. Standing there was a woman wrapped in a torn blanket, snow crusting her braids, eyes wild with exhaustion and cold. He pulled her inside without a word, closing the door against the freezing gale. She stumbled toward the fire, shivering violently, too weak to speak. Adam threw another log on the flames and poured hot water from the kettle into a tin cup. "Drink," he said softly. Her hands trembled so hard that he had to steady the cup for her. Only when her breathing slowed did he notice the beaded fringe of her torn dress, the sign of an Apache woman far from her people, far from safety. She looked up at him warily as though waiting for anger or questions. "You're safe here," he said, kneeling beside the fire. "I don't need to know why you came. Just sit and warm yourself." For a long while, only the crackle of the flames filled the silence. Outside, the storm clawed at the cabin walls, but inside, the world shrank to the soft light of the hearth and the slow rhythm of her breath returning. Adam wondered what kind of desperation drove someone to wander the wilderness in such weather. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse but steady. "I was running, soldiers. They burned our winter camp." Her words came in fragments, each one carrying the weight of loss. Adam had heard stories like hers before, settlers and soldiers pushing tribes off their lands, vengeance feeding vengeance, but hearing it now from a half-frozen survivor in his cabin turned the old tales into something painfully real. He nodded slowly. "You won't be found here. Rest. Tomorrow we'll see what can be done." She hesitated, as if unsure whether to trust him. Her dark eyes searched his face for deception and found only weariness. "Why help me?" she asked finally. Adam looked into the fire, the light catching the scars across his knuckles. "Because once someone helped me when I didn't deserve it either." That was all he said. She didn't ask again. Instead, she leaned closer to the warmth, her fingers stretched toward the flames, thawing life back into her skin. Hours passed. The storm refused to die. Adam set out a bowl of stew, and though she barely ate, the color began to return to her cheeks. He gave her a wool blanket from his bed and spread hay near the hearth so she could rest without fear. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, their cries carried by the wind. Inside, 2 strangers shared a silence that felt almost sacred, neither daring to speak, both knowing words could break the fragile peace that had formed between them. As midnight deepened, Adam sat by the window, rifle leaning against the wall. He watched the snow thicken, covering the tracks that led to his door. The woman stirred in her sleep, murmuring something in her native tongue, words he didn't understand but felt in his chest like a prayer. He wondered how many of her people were still out there, cold and hunted. He wondered how long before someone came looking for her. And for the first time in years, he found himself hoping dawn would take its time. When morning finally came, the storm had left the world silent and white. Adam stepped outside, breath rising like smoke, and saw that the drifts had buried everything beyond his porch. No soldiers, no tracks, just endless snow. He returned inside to find the woman awake, watching him quietly. "The storm's done," he said. "You can stay until it's safe to travel." She nodded, clutching the blanket tighter. Gratitude shone in her eyes, but so did pride. "My name is Kaya," she said at last. "Then rest, Kaya," he answered. You're not alone anymore." That night, as the firelight painted her face in shades of gold and shadow, Adam realized how strange it felt to hear another voice in his cabin. The loneliness he'd worn like armor began to crack. He caught himself studying her calm movements, the careful way she rebuilt strength without complaint. She was no helpless wanderer. She was a survivor, carved by hardship into something unbreakable. And he knew deep down that taking her in would change the quiet rhythm of his life forever. When the wind rose again, gentler now, Adam added one more log to the fire and sat across from her. Neither spoke, yet something unspoken passed between them, a kind of respect born in the ruins of the storm. She had entered his life like a ghost from the snow, and somehow she had brought warmth with her. Adam didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that when the next knock came at his door, he wouldn't meet it as the same man. The frontier had a way of testing the heart, and his test had only just begun. The storm broke overnight, leaving the world buried in silence and snow. Adam woke to the pale light of dawn creeping through the frost-rimmed window. Kaya still slept by the fire, her breathing steady, her face peaceful in a way he hadn't seen before. He watched quietly, realizing how small his cabin seemed now that it held 2 lives instead of 1. For years, he'd believed solitude was safety. Yet in that moment, he understood that safety could also mean stagnation, a life without meaning or warmth. He stepped outside, boots sinking deep into the drifted snow. The sky was blue again, sharp and clear after days of grey. Every tree glistened with ice, the air so cold it bit at his lungs. When he turned back toward the cabin, he saw smoke curling gently from the chimney. The sight made him smile. Somehow, the cabin looked less like a cage and more like a home. Inside, Kaya was awake, adding wood to the fire and stirring what was left of the stew. "Morning," Adam said. She nodded, cautious but calm. "The world still stands," she replied. Days passed slowly, measured by chores and the hum of rebuilding routine. The snow kept them trapped together, but neither complained. Kaya mended torn coats and cleaned the tools with quiet efficiency. Adam taught her how to feed the horses without startling them, how to measure grain and break ice for water. When he spoke, she listened. When she spoke, he learned things the frontier had never taught him. Patience, respect for silence, the power of stillness. The distance between them began to shrink, replaced by an unspoken rhythm that felt almost natural. At night, the wind carried coyote calls across the valley, and Adam would check the traps or mend gear by the hearth. Kaya often sat nearby, weaving small patterns into a strip of leather, the beads from her dress catching the light. She hummed sometimes, low, haunting melodies that seemed to come from the heart of the desert itself. They never spoke of her tribe, nor of what she had lost. Some things Adam knew could not be healed by talk. The only thing he could offer was space, warmth, and the decency to let her be. One morning, he found her outside, sleeves rolled up, chopping wood with practiced strength. He hurried to help, but she shook her head. "I need to work," she said simply. "It reminds me I'm alive." Her words struck him harder than the cold wind. He nodded and joined her anyway, not to take over, but to share the weight. They worked until the axe handles steamed from their breath and the pile of logs grew high. When they finally rested, their laughter, soft, surprised, cut through the chill like sunlight. It was the first time either had laughed in months. By late winter, the snow began to melt in patches, revealing dark earth and the promise of spring. The river below the ridge swelled with ice water, and the horses grew restless for open ground. Kaya walked farther from the cabin each day, learning the land's rhythm, where the rabbits burrowed, where the hawks nested. Adam watched her strength return with something close to pride. She was no longer the broken figure who'd collapsed at his door. She carried herself with quiet command, as though the land itself answered when she moved through it. One evening, as dusk fell gold and soft over the valley, Adam found her standing on the porch, staring west. "You thinking of leaving?" he asked. She didn't turn, only smiled faintly. "I think of going home, but I'm not sure where that is anymore." Her words lingered between them, heavy but honest. He wanted to tell her she could stay, that the cabin felt wrong without her there, but he bit back the impulse. She didn't owe him her company. The kindness he'd given had never been meant to bind her, only to give her back her choice. That night they shared a small meal by the fire, dried venison and beans. Outside, rain replaced snow, tapping lightly on the roof. Kaya spoke of her father teaching her to read the stars, of rivers that once ran clear through the valleys before settlers fenced them. Adam listened, realizing how narrow his world had been before her. She had survived a world that tried to erase her, yet she still spoke without bitterness. "The land remembers," she said softly, "even when men forget." Her words stayed with him long after she fell asleep beside the hearth. Spring arrived quietly. Grass pushed through thawed soil, and the smell of pine returned to the air. One morning, Adam woke to find the cabin empty. For a moment, panic seized him. But then he saw her outside, saddling one of the horses. Her belongings fit in a small satchel. She turned when he stepped out. "The snow's gone," she said. "So must I." He wanted to stop her, but the look in her eyes told him not to. Instead, he nodded. "You know where to find this place," he said. She smiled faintly. "And you know where to find peace." They stood there for a long moment, the wind playing through her hair, the horse shifting beneath her. When she finally rode off down the trail, Adam watched until she disappeared beyond the ridge. The land was quiet again, the kind of quiet that once felt like loneliness, but now carried something different, remembrance. He went back inside, sat by the fire, and stared at the blanket she had mended for him weeks ago. Her presence still lingered, in the smell of wood smoke, in the faint hum of the songs she'd sung. That evening he took his old rifle from its hook and cleaned it for the first time in years. He didn't plan to hunt. He simply wanted to do something that reminded him of purpose. The weapon gleamed under the firelight, reflecting his weathered face. Mercy, he thought, had a way of changing a man, not in a sudden revelation, but in small, quiet shifts that echoed long after the moment passed. Kaya had come into his life by accident, but she'd left him something priceless, a reason to look forward to another dawn. Weeks later, wildflowers bloomed along the ridge where her tracks had vanished. Adam often stood there watching the horizon, half expecting to see her return. She never did, yet every time the wind rustled through the valley, it carried a sound like distant laughter. And in that sound, he found something close to peace, the kind that doesn't erase sorrow, but lives beside it. He turned toward the cabin, smoke curling gently from the chimney, and smiled. For the first time in years, the frontier didn't feel empty. It felt alive.